Next on Currents News, Cardinal George Pell proclaims his innocence. The man once close to Pope Francis speaks out after his sex abuse conviction is unsealed. With sex abuse scandals raging, many people are talking about the church's canon law. What exactly is that? A Currents News exclusive is coming up.
For over a century, Moshi Brothers Incorporated have been selling Catholic items like these, but now the company is leaving the New York City area. I'm Tim Harfman, and that story is coming up.
Plus, drug company executives in the hot seat. Lawmakers want them to explain why prices are so high. The news starts right now. Cardinal George Pell vowing to appeal his child sex abuse conviction after the gag order on his case is lifted. Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Faublas. No shortage of reaction tonight to the Pell case. We first reported that the former close aide to Pope Francis had been found guilty of sexually abusing 2 boys at the end of last year. Today, that verdict was unsealed by an Australian court. Currents News' Michelle Powers has the latest.
You all right there?
The verdict first came down in December, but legal restrictions meant Cardinal George Pell, the Vatican's treasurer, couldn't be reported guilty in Australia until now. Pell, the country's most powerful Catholic, is now the most senior Vatican official ever convicted of child sex offenses. Pell was on trial for assaulting 2 choir boys in the late 1990s when he was Archbishop of Melbourne. The prosecution's case hinged on the testimony of one of those boys. He told the court Pell assaulted them after Mass, forced him to perform oral sex on him, and committed an indecent act with his friend. He also testified that a month later, Pell pushed him against a wall and groped him. He said, quote, "I didn't tell anyone at the time. I had no intention back then of telling anyone ever." The other victim died of a drug overdose as an adult, having never told his family of the abuse. The cardinal had called the allegations outrageous.
I'm innocent of these charges. They are false. The whole idea of sexual abuse is abhorrent to me.
He didn't take the stand during the trial. Instead, a video of his interview with Australian detectives was played to the court. He pleaded not guilty, and his defense lawyer said the accusations were a fantasy.
You still plan to fight the charges?
But a jury convicted Pell on all 5 charges. 1 of the sexual penetration of a child, and 4 of an indecent act with or in the presence of a child. It's a shocking fall from grace for one of the Vatican's top officials, who has long been an influential, if divisive, figure in Australia. He rose through the ranks of the church to become Archbishop of Melbourne, then Sydney, then a cardinal, before being appointed Vatican treasurer and a member of the Pope's informal council of advisors. But while his star rose in the Vatican, Pell came in for mounting criticism at home, as the Australian church became the center of a global child abuse scandal. A national inquiry into institutional responses to child sex abuse found 7% of the country's Catholic priests were accused of abusing children between 1950 and 2010. It identified nearly 2,000 alleged perpetrators, including priests, brothers, laypeople, and religious sisters. When he appeared in front of the Royal Commission in 2016, Pell faced questions about whether he had done enough to weed out abuse and get justice for the victims. Now the cardinal himself has been convicted, and other survivors of clerical sexual abuse unrelated to the Pell case are elated.
Justice is what I thought, justice for the victims. I think that should give everyone that's thinking about, whether you'll be believed or whether you will or won't win the fight, it should give you the courage to come forward and at least be heard.
Pell's conviction will undoubtedly hurt the Catholic Church, already battling decades of revelations about pedophile priests. The Pope removed Pell from his advisory council back in December, but the damage to the Church may be difficult to repair now that this global crisis has reached the top of the Vatican. Michelle Powers, Currents News.
The Vatican's reaction to the Pell case has been limited. Chief spokesman Alessandro Ghisotti appeared before television cameras.
This is painful news that as we are well aware, has shocked many people, not only in Australia. As already expressed on other occasions, we have the utmost respect for the Australian judicial authorities. Out of this respect, we await the outcome of the appeals process, recalling that Cardinal Pell maintains his innocence and has the right to defend himself until the last stage of appeal.
Prosecutors in Australia abandoned a planned second trial against Pell. The Vatican's Gisotti also said Pell is prohibited from any public ministry and from having contact with minors. Pell had close ties to the Pope. Francis handpicked him to be the church's financial czar and put him on the Select Cardinals Council. Crux editor John Allen joins us now to dig into the impact the Pell case could have on the Holy Father and the Vatican. John, really quickly, your reaction to the news.
Well, of course, this has been known for some time. When the conviction was handed down in December, some news agencies chose to report it despite the suppression order, the gag order in Australia. Others didn't. So we have all been waiting for this moment to come when the suppression order was lifted. So today, the news was not much of a surprise. Certainly when the verdict was handed down in December, I think many people, myself included, found that surprising.
When Cardinal Pell was facing trial, the Pope wouldn't comment on the case. I'm sure you recall that. Here's what he said.
Se io dicesse un giudizio a favore e in contro del Cardinal Pell, non sarebbe buono perché giudico prima.
John, the Holy Father wouldn't comment then. Today, the Vatican spokesman said he wouldn't comment other than calling the news painful until the appeals process is over. The Pope just wrapped up a landmark summit to combat child sex abuse. Can he remain silent about this Pell case?
Well, I mean, ultimately, that appeal is going to be decided one way or the other, Liz, and the system will have to comment then. But let me try to read between the lines for you here, tell you what is actually going on. What makes the Pell case different than, say, the case of ex-cardinal and now ex-priest Theodore McCarrick, whom Pope Francis recently defrocked, is that the God's honest truth is that senior people in the system here, and I am talking about people who are on the side of the angels when it comes to the fight against clerical sexual abuse, who have been working for reform on the abuse scandals for decades, simply are not convinced on the basis of the evidence that they've seen that Cardinal Pell is guilty. Many of them find the charge upon which he was convicted just very hard to believe. And I'm sure that has gotten to Pope Francis, and that, I think, is why they are withholding judgment until the final word in the Australian legal system comes in.
Now, to take that into account, John, we're also still waiting for the Vatican's findings on who knew what about Theodore McCarrick as he climbed the ladder of church power. Should there be an investigation of Pell and how the Pope chose him to fill high-ranking posts as well?
Well, certainly, if that appeal that Cardinal Pell has announced intentions to make, if that appeal is exhausted and if the finding of guilt is upheld, I'm sure there's going to have to be an investigation at multiple levels. There would presumably have to be a church trial to determine whether or not Cardinal Pell ought to himself be defrocked, much like what happened to Ted McCarrick. And I think there would also be an investigation about who knew what when. Mm-hmm. But again, I just want to inject a note of caution here that there are a lot of people in this town who have been around this issue a long time and who are not inclined to cover up for guilty parties, who are skeptical about this verdict. And so I think some other shoes are going to have to drop, Liz, before we know where we really are in terms of what's going to happen with the Pell case.
John, before I let you go, the Pope has vowed to wage an all-out battle against clerical sex abuse. How does the Pell case impact this declaration?
Well, I think it just adds more fuel to the fire. Certainly, survivors and advocacy groups, reform groups, will be pointing to the Pell case as an additional reason to hold the Vatican accountable for the promises that were made at this extraordinary 4-day summit we just lived through. Speaker after speaker said that we need to uphold zero tolerance, we need greater transparency, we need greater accountability. But the summit in and of itself didn't actually deliver any of those things. I think this contributes to the pressure on the Pope, his advisors, and the entire Catholic system to actually make good on those promises, Liz.
All right, John, we have to leave it there. Thank you as always. I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
You bet.
Cardinal Pell's conviction came under Australia's criminal law. Now, the church's Canon law also holds clergy accountable in cases of abuse. Current News' Emily Drewby is here to tell us about the differences between the two. Emily.
Liz, this past weekend, many sexual abuse survivors were outside the Vatican Sex Abuse Summit to share their frustration over what they call a lack of action when it comes to abusers.
We've been here talking about zero tolerance written into church law.
Non c'è un nome, non c'è una data, non c'è un...
There's no name, there's no date, there's no concrete measures. They are just words and more words.
In most American states, civil law provides only a narrow window of time for alleged abusers to be prosecuted. It's different under the church's canon law. A good example is former U.S. Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, found guilty of sexually abusing minors and subsequently expelled from the priesthood long after the first offense was committed.
The gravest penalty that corresponds to the gravest crime.
Canon law experts we spoke with explained that being removed from the priesthood is the worst punishment church law can inflict.
It's very significant because it means the loss of all rights and obligations in the church. So they're no longer publicly recognized as a priest. They're no longer entitled to the sustenance of the church.
It is very painful and very humiliating.
However, being found guilty by the church rarely results in jail time.
Our punishment does not involve imprisonment. First of all, because we don't have prison cells in our churches. What we have are more of a moral or spiritual side of the punishment by kind of a humiliation, kind of degradation.
The civil statutes of limitation can make it hard for people accused of sexual abuse to be brought to trial because of the time restraints. For the church to take up abuse cases, canon law is more flexible, with time limits up to 20 years and the possibility of an extension. On the secular front in New York, the recently signed Child Victims Act changed the criminal statute of limitations, making it so victims would be able to press felony charges until they're 28 years old, file civil suits until they're 55 years old, and allow anyone previously barred from suing because of the statute of limitations to do so during a one-time only period that would last a year. Experts further explained that canon and civil law operate simultaneously, meaning those who are punished under canon law could still have criminal charges brought against them in the jurisdiction where the crime was committed, of course, depending on the statute of limitations.
All right, Emily, thank you so much for that report. President Trump is in Vietnam at this hour for his second summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. The president arrived aboard Air Force One. Kim traveled by car and train. The two leaders will meet over 2 days, starting at dinner tomorrow. The biggest item on their agenda, North Korea's arsenal of nuclear weapons. The president's ex-lawyer, Michael Cohen, was in the U.S. House this morning to begin a series of congressional appearances. Today, he was testifying behind closed doors. According to the New York Times, Cohen was planning to talk about possible criminal conduct involving the president. Cohen starts a 3-year prison sentence in May for lying to Congress and other crimes. On the hot seat today, top executives of major drug companies. They were hauled before Senate lawmakers to explain their rising prices. Omar Jimenez has the story.
You'll find most members of Congress are sick and tired of the blame game. It's time then for solutions.
7 pharmaceutical executives representing companies from Johnson & Johnson to Pfizer were in the hot seat with the Senate Finance Committee Tuesday over the prices of their drugs. Some questioned over why drugs they sold overseas were cheaper than in the U.S.
Do you make a profit on the drugs that you sell in Germany or in France?
Yes, we do.
How is that not gouging the American consumer with high prices, even though you're giving other people in Western industrialized countries a better deal?
If a market the size of the United States were to collapse to the lower end of that pricing model, then I can just tell you AbbVie would not be able to invest the level of R&D that it invests today.
Each of the companies represented has had to answer tough questions about the high cost of drugs, and each executive testified about wanting to reduce prices in some capacity.
I understand the anger.
The Sanofi CEO adding they didn't see a single cause for rising costs and that it was time to take a comprehensive look. In Washington, Omar Jimenez, Currents News.
The Senate has failed to pass the Born Alive Act that would have protected babies who survived abortion. The measure had majority support but didn't have the 60 votes needed to overcome a filibuster mounted by Democrats. The bill required doctors to treat children born alive after attempted abortions that same way any other infant would be treated. Opponents argued the legislation was an attack on women's health. A state senator in California wants to break the seal on Catholic confessions if the penitent admits sexually abusing someone. Democrat Jerry Hill introduced the new bill. It would require priests to report the sex abuse confessions to authorities. The California Catholic Conference opposes the legislation, saying it doesn't protect children and violates constitutional rights and liberties. There's a lot more news headed your way. Emotions flare over the separation of children from their parents as the House holds a hearing into administration border policy. It's emotional for two brothers in Brooklyn. Their religious goods store, in operation since the 1800s, could soon be closed. And the National Haitian Youth Rally on stage in a Flatbush parish. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@thesalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back.
It's heavy. It's been a wonderful ride.
A religious article store in New York since the 1800s is shutting down. The Moshe brothers are the co-owners of the Brooklyn store that bears their family name. After more than a century supplying rosaries, statues, and other religious goods, they're closing the doors. Currents News' Tim Harfman reports.
Since 1893, Moshe Brothers Incorporated has been based in New York City, selling religious items like these. But brothers Fred and Paul say it's the end of an era.
It's heavy. It's been a wonderful ride. I've been here for 42 years myself. It is a connection to the family that we've had all these years, and it's not easy to let it go.
I feel bad that it's coming to an end because I like the idea of spreading the word of the Catholic religion.
Their grandfather migrated to the U.S. from Lebanon and opened shop in Lower Manhattan in 1893, later passing it on to his son.
My father came into the business during the Depression. He went off to World War II and came back and continued the business, and he survived it all.
For the past 2 decades, the wholesale business has operated in Sunset Park, Brooklyn.
A lot of people knew us. They would come back and say, oh, I knew your grandparents, or I knew your father. And it made things a lot easier for us to work with them.
Most customers are Catholic shrines, retreat houses, and universities throughout the United States. Items are crafted overseas and shipped out from Brooklyn. Paul and Fred say of the thousands of Catholic items they ship across the country, the most popular one is the statue of Our Lady of Grace. Rosaries, crucifixes, and gifts for baptism are also popular. But besides selling the sacred items, the Moshes are outspoken about their faith.
It's so important today, especially with the church being under attack the way that it is, that for me, this has exposed me to some of the deepest elements of our faith. And I really think if people were more aware of what's out there for them to go and visit, it would be a huge aid in their faith as well.
Fred and Paul are looking to sell their business to an out-of-state buyer by the end of the year. Otherwise, it will be shut down. In Sunset Park, Tim Harfman, Currents News.
Technology is changing the world, and Pope Francis is issuing new warning about dangers. The pontiff spoke out at a workshop for the Vatican department that's dedicated to the ethics on how lives are lived. This year, the group is focused on robots and what differences they could bring to human existence. The Holy Father is concerned about advancements that could get out of control.
L'odierna evoluzione della capacità tecnica produce un incantamento pericoloso. Invece di consegnare alla vita umana gli strumenti che ne migliorano la cura, si corre il rischio di consegnare la vita alla logica di dispositivi che ne decidono il valore.
The Pope also said technology has provided solutions to problems that were insurmountable until a few years ago. Back on Capitol Hill, emotions flared today amid accusations of kidnapping. The Democrat-controlled House Judiciary Committee grilled Trump officials about separating families after parents and children crossed the southern border illegally. Camila Bernal reports.
I'll always remember Roger because he was 9 months old.
Thousands of children separated from their parents, and lawmakers now demanding answers.
He had no band, no ID, nothing. And so one wonders where Roger is today.
The House Judiciary Committee holding its first hearing on family separations, where representatives repeatedly raised concerns about the tracking of families who had been separated at the U.S.-Mexico border. Chairman Jerry Nadler kicking off the heated debate.
When a stranger rips a child from a parent's arms without any plan to reunify them, it is called kidnapping.
Administration officials explained present-day challenges like an influx in family apprehensions, how the zero-tolerance policy was rolled out, and they pointed fingers at other agencies when pressed about who was responsible. Republicans stood firm on their side of the argument.
Someone even called it kidnapping today, which is kind of outrageous. It wasn't kidnapping.
Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona showing a photo of Americans whose relatives had been killed in incidents involving undocumented immigrants.
That is in part due to policies that fail to control our border and prosecute.
Meanwhile, in a separate bipartisan vote, the House Oversight Committee voted Tuesday to issue subpoenas related to family separations for additional hearings. In Washington, Camila Bernal, Currents News.
The shoppers are supporting him, a Walmart greeter with cerebral palsy who's set to lose his job. Thousands are signing a petition backing Jay Melton, who is a greeter at the store in Marion, Maryland. Walmart is eliminating his position, part of a company-wide transition from greeters to so-called customer hosts. Because of his physical limitations, Jay cannot apply for the new post. Still, Jay says he loves his job and has even offered to work for free. Still to come on Currents News, Haitian young people from up and down the East Coast come to Brooklyn to celebrate. We'll tell you why. And we'll also have the story of this man who bought all the Girl Scout cookies that were on sale. We'll be right back. They were out in force celebrating the spirit of Haiti. More than 100 energetic young people from across the eastern seaboard came to Brooklyn for the National Haitian Youth Rally. The gathering was sponsored by the Brooklyn Haitian Ministry and National Center of the Haitian Apostolate. Besides having fun, according to Brooklyn Auxiliary Bishop Guy Sansaric, the young people set goals of preserving the legacy of their parents, their faith, and the church. Under the theme Lead and Be Faithful, the group participated in cultural performances as well as a variety of workshops. Finally tonight, who can resist a Girl Scout selling cookies? Well, one man in South Carolina went above and beyond for a troop selling their goods in the cold. This Good Samaritan bought every last box of cookies. That's a whopping $540 worth, so the scouts could go inside and get warm. Kayla Dillard, who manages cookie sales for the troop and took the photo, said they didn't know the man and never got his name. Still, the young ladies were very grateful. And that man is my new best friend. I'm going to find him. That is Currents News. I'm Liz Faublas. Thank you so much for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.